Mr. Harrison was a man the world admired, envied, and at times even feared. With sharp business acumen and relentless determination, he had built a global empire from the ground up. His name carried weight in boardrooms, financial markets, and even political circles. He lived in a sprawling mansion on a hill overlooking the city, where chandeliers glistened in every room, marble floors stretched endlessly, and walls were adorned with priceless paintings collected from around the world. To outsiders, he had everything, a life most people could only dream of. Yet, behind those gilded doors, there was a silence that even his wealth could not fill. Every evening when the sun dipped below the skyline and shadows crept across the mansion's polished hallways, the emptiness of his home pressed heavily against him. Success had brought him prestige, but it had also carved away the things that mattered most: companionship, warmth, and the daily joys of family. Years earlier, he had shared his life with his beloved wife, Emily. She was the light of his world, the one person who balanced his ambition with compassion, his hunger for achievement with simple happiness. Together, they had dreamed of raising a family, filling their home with children's laughter. But fate had been unkind. A sudden illness had taken Emily from him, leaving the mansion colder than ever. Grief wrapped itself around his heart, and though he buried himself in work to dull the pain, the silence of his empty home always echoed louder when the night grew still. For years, Mr. Harrison resisted the idea of moving on. He convinced himself that work was enough, that building wealth and expanding his empire could somehow replace the void Emily had left. But one evening, after returning from a gala where he was celebrated as one of the most powerful men in the country, he sat alone in his grand dining hall at a table meant for 12, staring at a meal he had no appetite for. In that moment, he realized that power meant little when there was no one to share it with. It was during that season of reflection that the idea of adoption entered his heart. At first, it was a faint whisper, a suggestion from a friend who knew of his loneliness. But the thought grew, settling into him like a seed taking root. He remembered the conversations he and Emily had once shared about adopting a child, about opening their hearts to someone in need of love. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Perhaps the family he and Emily had dreamed of could still exist, though in a different form. After months of consideration, he made the decision. The day he walked into the orphanage was unlike any boardroom negotiation he had ever faced. Children ran about, some timidly glancing at him, others smiling with hopeful eyes. But one child stood apart. A little girl, barely 5 years old, sat quietly in a corner with a tattered book clutched to her chest. Her big brown eyes held a depth far beyond her years, eyes that spoke of pain, resilience, and silent longing. Her name was Amara. When Mr. Harrison approached, she did not run into his arms like some of the others. She simply looked up at him, studying his face with quiet caution. Yet, in that moment something shifted within him. It was as though Emily's voice whispered in his heart, "This is the one." The process of adoption was long and complicated, but Mr. Harrison's determination never wavered. And when he finally brought Amara home, the mansion that had once felt like a hollow monument to his success now carried a spark of life. Her laughter began to echo in the hallways. Her tiny footsteps tapped against the marble floors, and her drawings soon covered the walls of his office. Yet, despite his good intentions, old habits were hard to break. Mr. Harrison remained deeply entangled in his business. Meetings, flights, and negotiations often consumed his days and nights. He provided Amara with everything money could buy: expensive clothes, the best schools, lavish birthday parties. From the outside, it seemed she wanted for nothing. But behind her shy smiles, there was a quiet ache. Amara longed not for toys or riches, but for his presence. She wanted him to sit beside her when she drew pictures, to listen when she tried to read her storybooks, to hold her hand at school events. But more often than not, she found herself waiting in vain, watching the door that never opened until it was too late. And yet, Amara never complained. She adored her father and knew he loved her, even if his way of showing it was imperfect. She would leave small notes on his desk, little scribbles of hearts and stick figures labeled, "Daddy and me." Sometimes, He found them in the middle of late-night work sessions, and for a fleeting moment, he would smile and feel the warmth of family. But too often, the weight of his empire pulled him back into its grip, and those notes went unanswered. What Mr. Harrison did not realize was that the gap between them was growing, not because of lack of love, but because of absence. His love was real, but it was hidden behind the walls of his busyness. He had given her a house, but not a home. He had given her wealth, but not presence. And while he believed his empire would one day secure her future, what she craved most was the simple assurance that she was enough, that she mattered more than the world outside. This was the life they lived as father and daughter, bound by love, but separated by silence. And though the mansion no longer echoed with complete emptiness, its walls still carried an ache that neither of them fully understood. Little did Mr. Harrison know that one night, everything would change. That the very silence he had grown used to would be broken by a scream that pierced his soul, forcing him to confront not just the cruelty of the world outside, but also the blind spots of his own heart. The night was colder than usual, the kind of evening where the city lights shimmered against the dark sky like restless stars. Mr. Harrison's black limousine rolled quietly into the circular driveway of his estate, its polished body reflecting the glow of the lanterns that lined the path. After a week-long trip of back-to-back meetings, negotiations, and dinners in faraway cities, he was finally home. He stepped out of the car, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. His tailored suit was wrinkled from hours of travel, and his silver tie hung loosely at his neck. But despite his weariness, there was always a small spark of relief in returning to his mansion. He looked up at the towering home, its windows glowing softly in the night. To the world, it was a palace, but to him it often felt like a stage, grand, impressive, yet hollow behind the curtains. He longed, in that moment, to see Amara waiting for him. Perhaps she'd peek her little head out of her bedroom door or run down the stairs with one of her endless questions about the world. He smiled faintly at the thought. Maybe tonight, he could finally spend some time with her, make up for the many evenings he had missed. But the house was unusually quiet. The butler greeted him at the door, bowing politely. "Welcome home, sir," he said, taking the billionaire's coat. "Thank you, James. How's Amara?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying both casualness and hope. "She's in her room, sir," the butler replied with a small nod. "Seemed a little quiet this evening, but nothing unusual." Harrison nodded absent-mindedly. Quietness was not strange for Amara. She had always been gentle, soft-spoken, a child who preferred books and drawings over noisy games. Still, something in the butler's tone made him wonder. He began walking down the long hallway, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. The mansion's silence was heavy, pressing against him more than usual. He loosened his tie as he climbed the grand staircase, thinking only of surprising Amara with a goodnight kiss before retreating to his study. But then, a sound sliced through the silence. At first, it was faint, almost like the echo of a dream. But within seconds, it grew clearer. A sharp, piercing cry that carried not just sound, but pain. It was Amara's voice. His heart stopped. The cry rose again, this time filled with terror, desperation, and anguish. "No! Please stop!" The briefcase in his hand slipped and crashed onto the marble steps, scattering papers and documents across the floor. Harrison didn't even glance back. His body moved on instinct, his pulse thundering in his ears as he bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. "Amara!" he shouted, his voice trembling in a way it hadn't in years. The screams grew louder as he approached the east wing, each one striking him like a blade. He had faced ruthless competitors, hostile takeovers, even threats to his fortune and reputation. But nothing had ever made him feel this helpless, this stripped of control. For the first time, his wealth, his power, his influence meant nothing. All that mattered was reaching his daughter. He sprinted through the corridor, his shoes skidding slightly on the polished floor. Fear wrapped around his chest like a vice. Thoughts raced chaotically through his mind. Had someone broken into the mansion? Was she hurt? Attacked? Every step closer brought with it darker possibilities, each more unbearable than the last. Finally, he reached her bedroom door. It was shut, but the cries inside were clear, raw, and heartbreaking. He didn't hesitate. With a force he didn't know he still had, he flung the door open. What he saw made his stomach twist. Amara was curled on the floor beside her bed, her tiny frame shaking uncontrollably. Her school bag lay ripped open beside her, its contents strewn across the room. Torn notebooks, crumpled assignments, and broken pencils scattered like fragments of her spirit. She clutched a crumpled sheet of paper tightly in her hands, her knuckles white, her sobs breaking through the silence like shattered glass. For a split second, Harrison couldn't move. His mind tried to make sense of it. Why was she like this? What had happened in his absence? But the sight of her pain pierced through all questions. His legs finally obeyed, and he rushed to her side, dropping to his knees on the carpet. "Amara, sweetheart, what happened?" His voice cracked, his usual tone of command gone, replaced by sheer desperation. But Amara didn't answer. She only cried harder, burying her face into her arms, shaking as if the world itself had turned against her. Harrison reached out, his trembling hands brushing back her curls. He had faced losses worth millions, betrayals that could ruin empires, but nothing compared to the sight of his daughter broken like this. His chest ached with a guilt he could not yet name. "Daddy's here," he whispered, his voice low and trembling. "You're safe. Please, talk to me." But all she could manage between sobs was one sentence that shattered him completely. "They said I don't belong." Mr. Harrison froze when he heard those words. "They said I don't belong." The sentence lingered in the air like a dagger, its edges sharp enough to slice through his very soul. His empire of wealth, his towers of influence, all of it seemed meaningless in that moment. Here was his daughter, the little girl he had promised to protect, trembling on the floor, her innocence bruised not by physical harm but by something far more cruel: words. He pulled her gently into his arms, her small frame shaking against his chest. He could feel the wetness of her tears soaking through his shirt, each drop carrying a weight he knew he had partly caused by his absence. "Tell me, Amara," he urged softly. "What happened?" Her voice trembled, caught between sobs. "At school today, they laughed at me." She tightened her grip on the crumpled paper in her hand, her knuckles pale with strain. "They said I'm not really your daughter, that you only adopted me because you felt sorry, that I don't belong in a rich house like this." Her words came in fragments, broken by gasps for air, but each piece was enough for Harrison to understand. She pulled slightly away from him and held up the paper. Her eyes, red and swollen, met his as she handed it to him with shaking fingers. Harrison smoothed it out, and his heart sank as he read the childish handwriting scrawled across it. It wasn't hers. It was cruel graffiti, ugly words written by other children. "Fake family. You don't belong. Rich man's charity case." The paper trembled in his hands as anger surged within him. Not anger at Amara, but at the cruelty of a world that would dare to wound her spirit like this. His protective instincts roared inside him, a storm of fury and grief. "Who gave you this?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous, though he tried to keep it calm for her sake. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. They all laughed. They said my skin doesn't match yours, that I'll never really be your daughter." Her lips quivered as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "And maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." Her last words crushed him. For years, Harrison had believed that giving Amara the best education, the finest clothes, and every opportunity money could buy was enough. He thought his love was clear, even if his presence was scarce. But now he saw the truth. The world had seen the gap in their relationship and filled it with poison. They had preyed on her deepest fear, that she was not truly loved, not truly his. "No," Harrison said firmly, his voice shaking with emotion as he gripped her shoulders gently. He lowered his face to her level, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Listen to me, Amara. You are my daughter. Not because of money, not because of anything those cruel children said, but because I chose you. Do you understand? Out of the whole world, I chose you. But she only sobbed harder, her fragile heart struggling to believe. But why me? You could have adopted anyone. Why did you choose me? The question struck him like lightning. For years, he had carried the memory of that day at the orphanage deep in his heart, but he had never truly shared it with her. Now he realized she needed to hear it. I chose you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Because the moment I saw you, I knew my life would never be complete without you. You didn't run to me, you didn't try to impress me. You just sat there, quiet, with those big, beautiful eyes that held more strength than I'd ever seen. And I thought, this is my daughter. I didn't care about anything else. Your skin, your past, what anyone might say. I knew you were meant to be mine. Amara sniffled, her sobs softening, though doubt still clouded her expression. Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that streaked her cheeks. People are cruel, sweetheart, he continued gently. They see differences and they call them weaknesses. But do you know what I see? I see your courage. I see your heart. I see the little girl who left me notes on my desk when I was too busy working. Do you know how much those meant to me? They reminded me of what truly matters. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't known he ever noticed her scribbled hearts and stick figures. I may have failed you at times, he admitted, his voice breaking as guilt washed over him. I thought giving you everything money could buy was enough. But I see now I should have given you more of me. I should have been here, holding you when the world made you feel small. I'm sorry, Amara. So deeply sorry. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The mansion outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then, Amara's small hands reached up and clutched at his shirt, pulling herself closer to him. She buried her face against his chest again, not with the broken sobs of before, but with the quiet relief of a child finally being heard. Do you really mean it, Daddy? She whispered, her voice muffled but trembling with hope. Harrison tightened his embrace, pressing a kiss to her forehead. With all my heart, he vowed. You are my daughter, my pride, my joy, and nothing can change that. In that moment, something inside both of them began to heal. The brokenness of the cruel words, the emptiness of unspoken love, the weight of loneliness. They all began to give way to something stronger. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was real. As he held her, Harrison realized that what shattered him that night wasn't just the cruelty of others. It was the truth he had long ignored. Love was not proven in gifts or grand gestures, but in presence, in listening, in the simple, everyday act of being there. And he silently promised himself, never again would she question her place in his life. Never again would she cry alone. For a long time, Harrison held Amara in silence. Her tiny frame trembled against his chest, but her sobs gradually softened, her breathing becoming steadier with every minute in his arms. He stroked her hair, whispering soothing words, though his own heart was heavy with guilt. It struck him how fragile she truly was, not because of weakness, but because the world had planted doubts in her heart that he had failed to uproot. He kissed her forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin, and closed his eyes. For years, he had conquered hostile takeovers, silenced critics, and faced down storms in the business world. Yet nothing had ever shaken him as deeply as the tears of this little girl. In her pain, he saw his greatest failure, not as a businessman but as a father. Breaking the silence, Harrison gently pulled back just enough to see her face. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks streaked with tears, but in them glimmered a fragile hope. Amara, he said softly, look at me. She lifted her gaze hesitantly, as though afraid of what she might find in his eyes. I need you to hear this, sweetheart, he began, his voice trembling but resolute. You are not a mistake. You are not some charity case or a shadow in this house. You are my daughter, my family, my life. And no cruel words, no thoughtless laughter, no difference in skin or blood will ever change that. Her lips quivered, and her small voice broke the air. But what if they never stop, Daddy? What if they always see me as different? Harrison inhaled deeply, For a moment, he thought of his empire, the countless boardrooms where he had stood tall against men who mocked, underestimated, or even hated him. He thought of how he never once bowed to their scorn because he believed in his vision. Then he looked at Amara and realized this little girl needed the same lesson, but not in business, in life. Then let them see you as different, he said firmly. His eyes locked onto hers. Because different is not less. Different is strong. Different is beautiful. Those children laughed because they don't understand. They are blind to what makes you extraordinary. But I see it. I always have. She blinked at him, her tears pausing for just a moment. You know what true strength is, Amara? He asked gently. It's not in money or power or how loud someone's voice is. True strength is in kindness when others are cruel. It's in standing tall even when people try to push you down. And you, my sweet girl, have more strength in you than any of them will ever know. For the first time since he had entered the room, Amara let out a tiny, shaky laugh. A sound so fragile yet so precious. You really think I'm strong? She whispered. Harrison smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. Stronger than me. You know why? Because I built walls of wealth to protect myself. But you, at your age, you face the world with nothing but your heart. That takes courage. She leaned against him again, resting her head on his chest. Harrison wrapped his arms around her tighter, as if to shield her from every cruel word, every heartless whisper. But deep inside, he knew he couldn't shield her from the world forever. What he could do, however, was make sure she never faced it alone. Amara, he said with new determination, his voice steady now, I promise you this. From today forward, I will not just give you a house, but a home. I will not just give you things, but myself. I will be here not just in the grand moments, but in the small ones. I will sit with you when you study. I will cheer for you at school plays. I will listen when you're sad, and I will laugh with you when you're happy. You will never wonder again if you matter, because you are the most important part of my life. Her little hands clutched his shirt tightly, and though her tears returned, they were different this time. They were not born of sorrow, but of release, of a heart finally believing it was safe, it was wanted, it was loved. Do you really mean it, Daddy? She whispered again, her voice soft as a feather. With every beat of my heart, Harrison replied, pressing another kiss to her forehead. You are my daughter, chosen and loved beyond measure, and nothing can take that away. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong, like a drum declaring his vow. The mansion, once a hollow monument to success, seemed to breathe differently that night. It was as though its walls absorbed the promise, holding it within their foundations. As Amara's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion from crying, Harrison gently lifted her and laid her on the bed. He tucked her in, smoothing the blankets over her small body. She reached out sleepily, and he took her hand without hesitation, sitting by her side until her breathing evened and sleep claimed her. He sat there for a long while watching her peaceful face. The tears on her cheeks had dried, but the memory of her pain lingered in his mind like a scar. He vowed again, silently, fiercely, that he would never allow her to feel unloved, unseen, or unworthy again. That night, Harrison didn't retreat to his study to drown himself in work. He didn't check the stock markets, read contracts, or answer emails. Instead, he stayed by Amara's side, holding her hand until dawn's light touched the curtains. For the first time in years, he felt something deeper than success, something richer than wealth. He felt the true weight and privilege of being a father, and he knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed forever. The following morning, sunlight streamed softly through the tall windows of the mansion, casting golden rays across the polished floor. For years, those same rays had lit empty rooms, bouncing off lifeless art and gleaming marble. But today, they seemed different, warmer, brighter, as though the house itself had awakened with new life. Mr. Harrison sat at the edge of Amara's bed, still holding her small hand in his own. He had not slept a moment, but he didn't care. Instead, he had watched her, listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing, and allowed himself to feel something he had long buried, the fullness of fatherhood. When Amara stirred, blinking sleepily, her first sight was her father's face. For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes. She had grown so used to waking up to empty rooms, a silent house, and the absence of his presence. But then she saw his tired smile and the tenderness in his gaze, and her lips curved into a small, fragile smile of her own. "Good morning, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her hair gently away from her forehead. "Good morning, Daddy," she replied softly, her voice still hushed from sleep but carrying a hint of something new, trust. That day marked the beginning of a quiet but powerful transformation. A father's change. For the first time in years, Harrison pushed aside his tight business schedule. His phone, which once buzzed relentlessly with calls and emails, now lay forgotten on his desk more often than not. His assistant was shocked when he canceled high-profile meetings and postponed overseas trips. Investors were baffled when he delegated responsibilities he never would have entrusted to anyone before. But Harrison no longer cared about their confusion. What mattered now was not the next deal, the next acquisition, or the next headline about his empire. What mattered was Amara. He began showing up in the places where she had longed to see him. He walked her to school, holding her hand firmly as they passed the gates. At first, the children who had mocked her whispered and giggled, pointing at the sight of the billionaire father walking side by side with his little girl. But Harrison didn't flinch. He looked every teacher, every child, and every parent in the eye, silently declaring, "This is my daughter and I am proud of her." At home, he started joining her at the table for homework. Numbers and words scribbled across her notebooks became more than just schoolwork. They became bridges between them. Sometimes, she struggled, her brow furrowed in frustration. But instead of leaving her alone, Harrison patiently guided her, his deep voice gentle as he explained. Other times, he admitted with a chuckle that he had forgotten some of his own childhood lessons, and they would laugh together as they figured things out side by side. The study, once filled only with contracts and business charts, slowly gathered colorful drawings, sticky notes with Amara's handwriting, and the occasional paper airplane that had accidentally landed on his desk while he was working. A daughter's transformation. For Amara, the change was like the slow blooming of a flower that had long been hidden in shadow. The cruel words of her classmates had cut her deeply, but her father's unwavering reassurance began to heal those wounds. Where there was once doubt in her eyes, confidence started to grow. She began speaking up more at school, raising her hand in class, sharing her thoughts with courage. The same classmates who had mocked her began to notice her quiet strength. Though some still whispered, Amara learned to stand taller, not with arrogance, but with the assurance that she was loved and valued at home. She started drawing more pictures of her and her father together. Some showed them sitting at the table, some walking hand in hand, others simply smiling. She often ran to Harrison with her latest creations, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. And every time, without fail, he would stop what he was doing, kneel to her level and say, "It's perfect, Amara, just like you." At night, instead of crying silently into her pillow, she fell asleep listening to her father's voice as he read her favorite stories aloud. Sometimes he stumbled over the characters' names, and they would laugh until tears filled their eyes. Other nights, he made up tales of his own. Stories of brave little girls who faced dragons, storms, and cruel voices, but always emerged victorious because of their courage. Amara knew those stories were about her. The mansion transformed. The mansion itself seemed to change as their bond deepened. Once a place of silence and formality, it now echoed with laughter, music, and the simple sounds of family life. The grand dining hall, where Harrison had so often eaten alone, now held shared meals where conversation flowed freely. Sometimes the food was simple, even messy, when Harrison insisted they cook together. Flour dusted the counters, eggs cracked in the wrong bowls, and yet, the meals were more satisfying than any gourmet dinner he had ever tasted. Servants and staff, who had once moved quietly through the house, began smiling more openly. They, too, felt the shift, The mansion was no longer a museum of wealth but a home filled with warmth. A father's lesson. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Amara turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy, do you ever wish you had a real daughter?" she asked hesitantly. Harrison turned to her, startled, then quickly shook his head. "Amara," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "You are my real daughter. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And if I could go back and choose again, 1,000 times over, I would choose you every single time." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness this time, but of joy. She threw her arms around him, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." And for the first time in years, Harrison's own tears fell, unashamed. "I love you too, Amara. More than anything." A new chapter. From that day forward, they wrote a new story together. Harrison continued to run his empire, but it no longer defined him. His true pride was not in buildings, contracts, or bank accounts, but in the little girl who called him Daddy. Amara grew stronger, brighter, and more confident with each passing year, knowing she had a father who believed in her. Together, they faced the world, not as a billionaire and his adopted daughter, but as a family bound by love. And the mansion, once filled with silence, became a place where joy lived permanently. Its halls carried the sound of laughter, the walls held the warmth of love, and its rooms overflowed with the truth that money could never buy, the bond of a father and his child. Mr. Harrison had once thought wealth was his greatest treasure, but now he knew the truth. His greatest treasure was Amara, and nothing in the world could ever shatter that.